What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. So I am really excited to dive into this content today. This is the start of a lot of keyboard content that I'm going to be bringing to you for the channel for the foreseeable future because, frankly, I felt this need to cover things that you could actually buy right now. And since a lot of the market is sort of in turmoil, things like peripherals, desk setups, things like that seem like a more obtainable goal for a lot of people right now to sort of get the most out of what it is they currently have. So we're going to be doing a lot of custom keyboard builds on the channel and tying in a lot of different peripherals and other accessories. Sound off in the comments down below if there's some specific switch types you want to see me try out, or a specific cap set that you want to see get used in a build, or if there's a special drop on a keyboard body that you see that you'd like to see someone build with. I'd love to take a look at some of the stuff y'all are interested in. And for those of you that are new to mechanical keyboards in general, welcome. I hope you stick around and enjoy the content. And if you end up liking what you see, make sure you hit the like button on your way out and get subscribed and notified so you know every time I upload fresh content for you. The first build in this series is called CyberWit, and it's going to be based on the Drop Carina here, which is a 60% keyboard that they just released with a full acrylic body, all of the RGB lighting, and QMK firmware compatibility. All right, so let's talk about this, this whole setup we've got here. I'm calling this build CyberWit. Partially because the color scheme for the lighting, the caps, and the switches happens to match really well with the Cyberpunk 2077 color scheme, at least in my opinion. But I'm also partnering it up with the BitWit Ensemble 1 desk mat here in Cotton Candy. This is probably my favorite desk mat of the year to release. It's got a really clean aesthetic to it. I really like the Miami Vice vibes that I'm getting off of the little PC components that are spread out throughout here. It's also got really tight stitching on it, even clean movement on X and Y axis. I'm gonna have this link down in the video's description. Make sure you have this bookmarked and be following Kyle so you know the next time he gets these back in stock, because these tend to sell out really fast. Now, as far as the cable for the keyboard, I've actually gone with this Paracable solution. It's a 3-foot long cable. I believe it's part of their Continuum lineup. I'll have this link down in the video's description as well. But the main reason I went with it is, again, it's only a 3-foot long cable, and at my desk, just like here, I'm usually using a Tilted Nation Shadow headset stand, so I really don't need a whole lot of cable for my keyboard. Not to mention, this is a 60% keyboard anyway, so I wanted this to be as portable as possible, so having a relatively short cable for this worked out really well. Now, the meat and potatoes of the build is, again, based on the Drop Carina. This is a 60% board that I believe this is the very first run of them that went out. I could be wrong, though. I just know this hasn't really been widely available for very long. It is a fully acrylic body in the 60% layout. There are some really nice rubber feet on the bottom of this, but you are stuck at this specific angle right here. There's no tilt adjust or anything like that. So that's going to be a love it or hate it thing. I personally don't have a problem with it. The way I type, this is actually a great angle for me. It's got a really cleanly laid out PCB, and a couple things to note here with the PCB is A, it is using KL hot swap sockets that are north facing. This means you'll have maximum RGB shine through on keycaps that are compatible with shine through legends, but you will have some compatibility issues depending on the switch and cap profile you're using in tandem here. So just keep that in mind. The other thing to note with the PCB is there are 2 USB-C ports on here. These do act as hot swap. I have confirmed this functionality with the card reader that I use for transferring my footage into my computer, and it definitely acts as hot swap. That's really nice if you were looking for a portable keyboard solution that doesn't really let you lose out on any of your I/O expandability if you're doing a lot of work on the go. So I really approve of that functionality. We also, of course, have all of the RGB on the keyboard. Not only do you get shine through per switch, but you also get shine through on the underside of the chassis. Now, As many LEDs as there are down here, because they're set further inward than you would see on something like a Womi or K66, it's really cleanly diffused around the outer edges, and that's especially apparent when you're using a rainbow light cycling mode on the board. It just looks like this clean, smooth bar of light that's just evenly transitioning colors all the way around the perimeter. It looks really nice. Now, as far as the mid plate for this keyboard, you can actually get that in 3 different varieties with this keyboard. Now, I opted for the aluminum plate because I wanted something that was a bit more forgiving, considering the switch that we're using for this keyboard. You can also get this in brass and copper though. And lastly, this board is compatible with QMK firmware, but if you're afraid of QMK firmware, you can use Drop's Configurator app on the website, provided, of course, you have a Drop account, which is how you would order this board in the first place. And you can use that to set up the keyboard. I will have all of the links for how to properly set this up down in this video's description, because while the little QR code here that comes with the keyboard is nice for directing you how to assemble the keyboard, once you get past that point, setting up the custom lighting on this the way you would want it and doing your key assignments the way you would want it is not necessarily the most straightforward thing ever. Now, while I will say that the ability to set up the firmware directly makes this a shockingly powerful keyboard, I'm not going to spend really any time on it in this video. I feel like that deserves its own dedicated coverage as and when I'm more accustomed to what it is this configurator really can and can't do versus what QMK firmware setup the proper way is capable of. So stay tuned for that content. Now, as far as the switches we went with, I decided to go with Gateron yellow switches. I was considering another switch that I recently got in, which I will be producing some more content on soon, but that was a tactile option and it had some interesting characteristics that I wasn't really looking for this board. Gateron yellows are really nice in that they're a relatively cost-effective switch for what they provide. It's nice, it's got nice, smooth, linear action on them, and they respond extremely well to lube and film being applied to them. These are widely regarded budget kings when it comes to getting just buttery smooth linear action. And of course, the color of the stem being yellow, it works really well with the whole cyberpunk color scheme. Now, for the main cap set here, we went with Ducky's Frozen Llama cap set. This is the same cap set that you would get on the Frozen Llama keyboard. It's a sort of teal and blue set with white legends, and you've got some purple modifiers that come with this as well, but I opted not to use them for this particular build. In their place, I instead went with a set of rubber tie-how keycaps. This is part of an 18 cap set. I've never used tie-how rubber caps before, but my previous experience with rubber caps in general, you gotta kind of treat these almost like high-performance tires on a car that are meant for track use. After a couple of goes at the track, you're gonna need to chuck these and get brand new ones anyway. They tend to stain on me really easily because I have naturally oily skin. It's a thing. So I will get back to you all on how well these age, but I like the sort of extra color pop these provide, as well as the added texture on the keys that I use most for gaming, because again, this is primarily a gaming keyboard. And then I went with a custom spacebar down here. This is just some Banggood spacebar that I found. Didn't really cost a whole bunch, but I really like the sort of blended color accent it adds to the keyboard. I don't know, I don't know, I like it. Now, as far as any extra functionality with the keyboard goes, there are actually programmed hotkeys through the second layer on this keyboard that you can access using the right Alt key here. They include things like changing lighting modes and accessing some of the other nav keys that you have. But when you manually control the lights for the top layer, the main layer that you use, it doesn't seem as though the lighting controls will actually change the RGB lighting. Rather, it changes the RGB lighting for the second layer. Like right now, I'm holding the right Alt, and that, as you can see, is accessing the light cycling mode I have to let me know that I'm in a different layer. And again, it does allow you to control the other modes and speeds for the lighting, but it only seems to work for that second layer when you manually set the lighting like I've done here. It is, however, nice to see that you have the flexibility to add in the hotkey functionality that you need, including volume control on a 60% keyboard. That's not something that you typically see in pre-built keyboards in this form factor. All right, so let's dish on the Drop Carina a little bit more, because there was a lot that I did like about this board, and there were some things that popped up that I feel have room for improvement with the board to bring this from good to great. As far as the assembly process is concerned, this is a very straightforward assembly. There are only a handful of parts involved in it. They can only go so many places, and the PCB will only fit in one way anyway, so you'll know pretty quickly if you're doing something wrong. And again, while the assembly directions for this were actually by and large pretty good, once you get past that, using the configurator and installing a custom firmware is a little bit of a nebulous process, in that you have to sort of read through comment sections or forum posts within Drop to find the information you need. It's there, and again, I will have it all linked down in the video's description for anyone that's building with this keyboard that's a little confused on what to do next. I just would like that to be a little bit easier to find for someone that is maybe new to building a custom keyboard of this caliber. Once you find that info though, setup is honestly very straightforward and shockingly powerful. You can reintroduce a lot of functionality into this keyboard that, again, you don't really see a whole hell of a lot in a 60% form factor. Now, one of the trade-offs with a chassis like this is, because of all of the RGB shine through that you have here, you typically want to have a bit of a gap between the acrylic layer and the RGB lighting so that it's more cleanly diffused across the frosted surface here. This leaves you with a bit of a gap underneath the PCB. Now, this hollowness may or may not bother you depending on the acoustic profile you're going for. It is admittedly very subtle, in my personal opinion. You could get a small layer of sorbethane down in here and you'd probably address most of it, but you run the risk of that impacting RGB shine through on the keyboard, and that's honestly one of the selling points for the board. So that's all gonna be a personal preference thing. Now, stabilizers here. Expect to replace the stabilizers. I don't know if it's just this board or if it's widespread. Knowing the history Drop has with their keyboards, I'm gonna go ahead and say this is probably gonna be a commonplace thing. The stabilizers here are not great at all. I understand they had to go with plate-mounted clip-in stabilizers if they wanted to keep this as sort of easy to work with as possible. And you do have to admit, plate mount stabilizers are easier to get out. You don't have to disassemble any of the rest of the keyboard to get to them. They're also cheaper to manufacture, I would imagine, but the main thing here is the tolerances are so all over the place with these things. I clipped them, I Chad-lubed them, and they still rattle like crazy. And there's a lot of play in either side of the switch that has a stabilizer equipped to it. So I'm probably going to revisit these in a future content piece, see if we can't shore that up. But for right now, just know, going into this keyboard, you're probably going to want to get your own set of clip-in stabilizers for this build. As far as gaming goes with this, I love this board. I absolutely love this board. I was using Kale Speed Silvers for my gaming keyboard previously, and while I like the short actuation distance on them, the problem was the spring is so light in those that I was accidentally holding down keys without even realizing I was doing it, getting really annoying. The spring in Gateron yellows is heavy enough that I don't do that anymore. And the smooth actuation for this switch, it just feels so much better, especially after applying lube and film to the switches than my Kailh Speed Silvers did. Though I will be revisiting the Speed Silvers later on because I think there's still some potential there. Honestly, typing isn't really that bad either. You just have to kind of get used to the fact that some of your keys have this different rubberized sort of diamond plate texture on them. Once you get past that, it really is rather nice to type on these. Now, admittedly, one of the more controversial decisions that I made with this that I didn't mention in the close-up is I installed O-rings underneath all of my keycaps because I tend to be a bit of a heavy-handed typist, and I tend to want to bottom out really frequently with any linear switch I have ever tried. So while I prefer them for gaming, I don't like the sound or the sensation of a hard bottom out with most linear switches. These specific O-rings from WASD keyboards give me enough cushion on bottom out that it feels a lot better to me. It's also quieter because, again, I am in a room with another person when I'm using this keyboard, and it shortens the travel enough that it's not as fatiguing for me to use these, especially if I do end up doing a bit of typing on the board. Now, there was one other little thing that I ran into. I don't know how widespread this particular issue would be, but there's a tiny bit of a rattling sensation that you get if you're a little heavy-handed with the switches in the bottom left and right corners of my specific keyboard. It seems like there's a bit of a tolerance issue going on where there's a very slight gap between the resting points for the PCB on the chassis and where the PCB actually sits once it's fixed into place. So what ends up happening is when the aluminum plate flexes, the PCB then flexes a little bit and taps against the acrylic case. I was able to fix it on one of the corners by just cutting out a little piece of Band-Aid and applying it to the perch where the PCB sits. I no longer have that rattling sound there anymore, but it does still exist on this side. So again, there are things to revisit on this keyboard, but the fact that it's as easily disassembled and reassembled like it is makes this possible in the first place. Now, that said, given the overall cost of this keyboard, I would say in its current state, if you're okay with doing some of your own mod work to make this board everything that it can be, I can very strongly recommend it, because outside of some of the manufacturing tolerance issues that are going on here, this really is a solid package. The RGB lighting looks really good. QMK firmware compatibility gives you a lot of power in a really small package. Dual USB-C ports with pass-through on a 60% is something you really don't see very often out there. And hot swap socket functionality with 5-pin sockets means you never have to modify any of the switches you ever go to use on this keyboard. So admittedly, while there is a lot to like about it, there is still some room for improvement here, but as a general gaming keyboard, especially the way I'm using it right now, I am still very happy with how this product turned out. What would you have used for this keyboard if this was a build you would have gone into? Is there a different cap set combination or color combination that you would have used? Or do you prefer a tactile switch for your gaming setup? Let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And as always, I'll catch you all next time. Take it easy.